a Thursday night. And today we're going to talk about home health productivity. And we are on Zoom, but it's not too large on Zoom. And we're also live in the Rate My Therapy Company Facebook group. And I pretty much wanted to do this because the two top questions that we have in the Rate My Therapy Company group are pretty much about like what's fair and what's not fair. So it has to do with productivity and then what's common paid. Because a lot of the times we just don't know what's common or if we're getting paid a certain amount, if it's too much or too little, and then also if our productivity standard is fair or unfair. So I figured, hey, let's just do a talk on productivity. I might do it for each setting or just for one setting. So, and if you guys do have any questions, feel free to preferably comment in the Facebook group because I have that on my phone so I can see any comments or questions. And a little bit about me. And can you guys all hear me okay? Lisa and P Den.
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, good. That's great. And a little bit about me. My name's Yonas. I am a physical therapist. I'm in San Diego, and I started Rate My Therapy Company about 3 years ago, just basically because I remember joining a nursing facility. It was my first, it was my second travel job, and I really didn't know what it was like. And I didn't like that I didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I created this group pretty much to be a platform where therapists can just learn about a facility or job before they go to the job. Because a lot of times we don't know what it's really like. So this is essentially like an open platform to improve transparency. And that was kind of why I started. It was like for my own selfish need, just so I can learn what facilities are like. And if you guys do have any questions, Lisa, I know that we talked a lot kind of in Facebook comments and stuff. Just feel free to shout or if you have any feedback. And a lot of things with productivity, we typically, as a therapist, we don't just make our own productivity. We just accept it based off of what your employer tells you it is, and also what other therapists are doing. So kind of, I remember when I was a new grad, I just did whatever my employer told me to do and whatever the other therapists did. And that kind of just like shaped what I did for the future. And that's very common as a new grad. We just kind of don't know what's normal and what's not normal. So we just accept it. And there are a lot of unethical things going. There's a lot of unfair productivity standards that are going, but because we don't talk about it, because unfair, we just do it. And that affects the therapist, affects the employers, and it affects patients like all in bad ways. And the goal of this PowerPoint is just to explain what is productivity, define it. I think I put that in my next slide. Yeah, to just define productivity and also just to share examples of productivity. And then also, lastly, like just ways to be more efficient in the medical field. Because a lot of the times, we could be more efficient as well. I mean, sometimes the job's terrible, right? And the is just unrealistic. But in some cases, there are like good jobs with realistic standards, and we can also be more efficient as therapists. And you guys can all see the slides. So next, we're just gonna talk about productivity and what is it, because it's good to define it. So on the APTA website, so the American Physical Therapy Association, they said productivity should balance the physical therapist's clinical judgment, evidence-based practice, ethical considerations, the patient experience, and patient outcomes. It should also consider the economies of care delivery, models, and improvements of the provider's work experience. That was a mouthful. And then the the Open Journal of Occupational Therapy, it says the quality, state, or fact of being able to generate, create, enhance, or bring forth goods and services. And then also the Archives of Rehab Research and Clinical Translation. It said productivity is the expectation of clinicians to produce a given number of billable units per unit of time worked. Those are kind of like just three point like three places where productivity is talked about, and productivity is kind of different in each setting. For me, I currently work in a skilled nursing facility, but I've worked in all settings, like except for peds and schools. But productivity, it could be different if you work in outpatient in the or in care facility or the outpatient setting. And there's a lot more settings out there. So here we're focusing on the home care setting with productivity. And first of all, I love the home health setting. If you guys worked in the home health setting, you can comment home health. It's one of my favorite settings. There's definitely pros and cons, but in one thing that's different in the home care setting is you see patients inside their homes, whether it's a nursing facility, an RV park, or a two-story home. And essentially, the patient has to be homebound. So they're confined to their home to where it's very difficult to leave the home. And it requires a considerable and taxing effort. That's kind of the Medicare terms for them to be homebound. And if your patient is homebound, they can leave the home for short periods, such as like a family reunion, a funeral, church, or doctor's appointments. And they can just take those occasional trips. But for the most part, they should be homebound. And I know it's a gray area. A lot of the times when I work in home health, there's patients that are supposed to be homebound, but they're out shopping, they're out going for drinks with their friends. And I'm like, oh man, that's not homebound. But that's home health. But yeah, essentially it's pretty clear what's homebound and what's not. So that's what it is. And then just generally some pros of the home health setting is it's very meaningful. You see a patient in their natural habitat, like inside their home, and you really see changes as well. I also really love the flexibility of working in the home health setting. It's very autonomous and you can really unplug on the drives. I feel like I'm a single guy. I don't have kids, but eventually I do want to get married, have kids. I feel like if you do have a family, because you can just like do family tasks or some kind of errand and you can see patients. Just the autonomy is the best in the home care setting. And one of the biggest cons of home health setting is sometimes some people might say the documentation. If you're an evaluating therapist, you have to do a long form called a start of care, and you also don't know what you'll get inside of a home. I've seen homes that are infested with mice, infested with pets. I've been bit by a cat before, where my leg was infected, but it was okay. But now I don't mess with cats, I don't mess with pets, and I've learned to keep my distance. And overall, I think the pros are more than the cons, but that's a little bit about the home health setting. This is not about the home health setting, it's about productivity in the home health setting. So we're gonna dive deeper. And if you guys ever happy to ask questions, I love it. I think it's one of my favorite settings based off of where I am. So next, we're going to talk about home health productivity. And in home health, there's different payment types. You can get paid by salary, like you get paid, let's say, $80,000 per year or $150,000 per year. I've seen jobs like in California and Sacramento that pay kind of on the higher end. You can get paid per visit, you can get paid by the hour. And even if you're a traveler or a travel therapist, you can just get a guaranteed hour of pay as long as you attempt to work. If you don't meet your quota because the caseload's low, you'll still get paid as long as you have a guaranteed hour, which that's what I always try to get. And a sample of getting paid per visit, essentially for the PP is if you see a patient, let's say you see a patient, you do exercises for a routine visit and you get paid, let's say $75. That's like pay per visit. And next, most companies do have some kind of a point system for productivity, which means you have to hit a certain amount of points to meet your quota. It could be 25 points, could be 30 points, could be 35 points. And we'll kind of talk about that. And depending on the kind of visit, for some companies, it is a different amount of points. So, for example, one company that I worked for, to do a startup care, which is like a very long form, that's typically like 2.5 points. And then doing an evaluation, I'd say a good amount is like 1.5 points. And then doing a routine visit is about 1 point. And I kind of think of these points as like 1 hour of work. And pretty much within that hour, it's to include everything that you have to do. So it's like calling the doctor, your drive time, your seeing patient, your documentation time. So I've learned in home health, it's waste your time because then you can really maximize your time as well. Um, and there's, some people are just faster with things than others as well, and that's okay. And mileage. So it's also good in the home health setting to get paid per mile that you drive because we have inflation, things are getting more expensive. Our pay rates are not increasing to match inflation. So it's a struggle for a lot of us therapists. And if you have all this debt too, but you really want to always get mileage on your jobs. And it's just based off of the federal rate. So it typically goes up every year. For the year of 2023, it's 65 cents per mile. So it'd be good to get that rate with your travel company. And there are other cases where you might not get a federal mileage rate. For example, for me, I've worked a lot of home health jobs as a travel PT. One job in San Francisco because there's a lot of like bumpy roads and a lot of hills. It's tough to find parking. It's a busy city. We actually had a, a Lyft account, so I didn't drive at all. I just literally, when I would see a patient, I would take Lyft and then go from one patient to the next. It was actually pretty amazing because I can just do whatever I wanted in the car. And some of these Lyft drivers, man, they would think it's NASCAR, and I would just go back and forth because in San Francisco, there's a ton of hills. So if your Lyft driver is a fast driver, you really feel it. But in that case, I didn't get paid the mileage rate because I didn't pay for gas. I didn't use the car. It was actually amazing. It was like a great experience. And then also some companies provide a company car and they can give you a gas card. I worked one travel contract where there was a company car. The area was super rural and I literally would drive. Some commutes were 1 hour long. I felt like I was a glorified taxi driver, just driving, and I would still get paid, but I didn't mind. Sometimes I would see two patients a day, and then I would get paid. And in that scenario, actually, for that travel contract, the productivity standard was extremely loose. I literally would just see my patients, but they didn't even tell me a standard. I think because their caseload was so low and they didn't have a full-time PT, so they were just desperate. But I had a guaranteed 40 hours per week. So as long as I attempted to work, I would work 20 hours, 30 hours, 15 hours even, and I would still get paid. And that job, because I was getting paid a good chunk and I wasn't really working. And let's see. How's everyone doing? Is everyone doing okay? I know it's a long day at work. I'm on the West Coast in California. Thumbs up. Thank you guys. So for me, it's 7 p.m. But if you're on Eastern time, it's 10 p.m. And if you're on Central time, it's 9 p.m. So
I'm on Eastern time, Yonas. I'm in Florida, but this is definitely worth it. So thank you for doing this.
bless your soul. Thank you so much. That is very kind. That's very kind. All right. And yeah, guys, this won't be too long. It should probably be maybe less than 30 minutes. So maybe like 12 more minutes or so. And then you guys can all go to bed and start the day and it'll be Friday. Notes I had, I guess, to define productivity. And then, yeah, I'll just define it a bit more and then we can talk about samples of productivity. So some other equation of productivity that I found online from different sources is the productivity percentage is the actual build units, such as your hours, visits, or relative value units over the potential build units. Another one was let's see, the rate of the units, such as your billable time, your patient seen, your number of visits, evals, or revenue given amount of time. So it's kind of like your rate of units over the time that you're there. That's another explanation of productivity. And next, we're just going to talk about sample of different home health jobs. So these pretty much were, I don't know if you noticed, but in the Rate My Therapy Company group, I've been asking, hey, like, what's your productivity for your job in this setting, just to kind of gauge what people are doing. So these are real live examples of the productivity standards for people in the home care setting. And I think two of them were mine jobs actually that I've worked in the past. But we can just, I guess, briefly go through them because I think it's good to hear what's a sample of of real productivity and to hear if we think that's fair or unfair. And we can go through this. So this was actually one job I had in Sacramento. It was actually one of my best jobs. Their back office was super smooth, but it was pay per visit for. And in California, typically the jobs pay a bit more in Northern California. So here for a start of care, it was 150, which that's not high actually. That's actually lower, but we would rarely do starts of care. We mainly would just do evals and routine visits because there were no assistants and the PTs they would just follow the patients. But for an eval, it was 120, and the routine visit it was 110. So I was pretty satisfied with that in Sacramento, California, because it's really good to when comparing these like the rates for pay and the productivity. It's just good to know like what's the area because the cost of living can affect the pay. Like in some places in Florida, sometimes they don't pay PTs as well, where places in the Bay Area of California, they'll pay more in most cases. Not every case, but in most cases. But for this one, I was very satisfied with this pay, especially in Sacramento. There was a low cost of living, and I really didn't. And full time, I believe it was 20 visits. It was like 20 visits. That was full time, and it didn't matter if they were evals, routines, or starts of care. So that was it. That was actually an amazing job I worked. And the next one, it says 30.5 points, and each visit is 1 week. So 30.5. So that's 30 visits 1 week. I think 30 visits is a lot. And I don't know what the area or if this is for and so that's probably like 6 visits a day. I mean, that's that's pretty typical, I think, for I guess most 5 to 6 a day. Some see four. So yeah, that's okay. I think it's a little high, but it's okay. And if you got feedback, whether you like a job or if you don't like it, feel free to comment or shout something. We just have a few scenarios. We can just this one is just visits per week, 20 part-time, 24 full-time. So a lot less visits for this one. I think that's okay. I think it's definitely possible to do 24 visits per week. That's my math is bad. That yeah, that's like five per day. Yeah, definitely. That's very possible. 5 per day. And also as long as it's a closed off territory and you're not driving too far, it makes it a lot easier because it's always great to ask how big is the territory because you don't want to be spread thin. Because if you're spread thin, you're gonna hate your life, you're paid as well for the drive time as much. So try to have a close territory because some companies do have that. And I guess we will. This is a company that I know who wrote this one. It's through Kaiser in California, and they have amazing productivity standards. A, a lot of their workers stay there for life because they have good benefits. I think they have a pension plan, and they even have a union, which is like crazy rare. But in California, Kaiser physical therapists do have unions to essentially protect them. I feel like a lot of therapists can learn from what they do there. Because so pretty much this is actually what a friend posted. He said a, a normal day could just be each line. And he works 5 days a week. So one day could be 3 evals, or 2 starts of care, 4 to 5 treats, depending on drives, 2 evals, 1 treat, or 3 evals. So I think, and he's worked like a lot of home care jobs. I actually know the guy, but that sounds amazing. I probably would keep that job if I wasn't a traveler. And maybe let's see. Let's talk about this one. This one says, my company had me doing 32 points for full time with a very large coverage area. PTA, 1 point per visit. I switched to PRN, 32 points for full time. Yes. So in this one, it said there was a large coverage area. So they're driving a lot, they're spread thin, and 32 points. So, I mean, over 30 points in a week is a lot. It just depends on your goals. I mean, I know some therapists, and I remember at one point for me, I worked a travel job and then I worked a per diem job on top of it because I wanted just to like pay off my loans as soon as possible. I wanted to be smart with my money. So it worked out because it was for a, a short time and I had a goal to just work more to make more. But I think working more than 30 points is a lot. That's definitely a lot. And it looks like they switched to PRN probably because it was too much. And okay, let's see what else we got. And then these are just different tips to be efficient. But even before going there, one thing I forgot to mention is if there are different visit types, there are evaluations, start of cares, and discharges, routine visits. We'll just focus on kind of these three. But I'd say I I sometimes see kind of as I mean, I've been a therapist since 2018, so about 6 years ish, just just like barely 6 years. But I've seen the productivity standards are increasing, where it's like one eval consistently. At one point it was 1.5, and now it might be like 1.4 or 1.3 or 1.0. It's just like the productivity standards are increasing, and it's not like we're getting paid more. But I'd say a good point system for starts of care is like 2.5 to 3 because they take a long time. And some companies might give 2 points for a start of care. Some might give 1.5 points, and some might pay extremely little. But starts of care, they take like 2 to 3 hours, sometimes 3.5 hours, sometimes maybe 4 hours. If the medication list is complex, if the systems are not set up well with your home care agency, because I've seen home care agencies where the systems are dialed in, their back office is dialed in, and the paperwork is a lot less because the back office is efficient. And if you use templates, it makes things go quicker. But I've seen some travel companies or some home health settings with travel companies where the back office is just jacked up and everything takes longer, scheduling's longer, and it just doesn't make sense. But I'd say for a start of care, it's good to keep them at least at 2.5 points. And then for an evaluation to keep it at least at 1.5 points, for a routine visit to keep it at least at 1 point. So 2.5 for start of care, 1.5 eval, and a routine visit for one. Because I've seen some companies, they change the routine visit. Like it used to be one, and then it's like, then it's 0.9, 0.7. And I think a lot of the times we just accept it, we don't question it, and we just meet the standard because it's set by the employer, maybe because their profits are squeezed, and then we get squeezed as well, then our patients get squeezed. And then the standard just keeps getting more difficult to meet and nothing's said. So I just wanted to bring up that point. And next, we're just going to talk about some tips to be more efficient on your healthcare job. Yes, some productivity standards are unfair, are unrealistic, but some are fair. And sometimes we actually can be more efficient as a therapist and use our time wisely. So these are just some quick tips. And one thing to think is if your productivity standard is realistic or unfair, is are you able to actually do your full workday without working off the clock? If you need to work off the clock, then the standards are like unrealistic most of the time. Most of the time, it's just too much and it's not possible. But whenever I schedule, I always give a 2 hour window to patients. For example, I say hey, Miss Smith, I'm going to be there between 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. I know some therapists, they say they'll be there within a 30-minute window, but I try to never do that because that just puts me in a box. I know sometimes there's traffic or just things always pop up. Like the patient before you might cancel, maybe you have to call 911. So I always try to give a big window. Sometimes I even give a 3 hour window, but most of the time it's a 2 hour window. And excuse me. And another tip is whenever I schedule with a patient, I always try to schedule with them in person. Like when I call them on the phone to do an eval and then I see them in person, I try to schedule the next visit with them in person because it's a lot easier to do it when you're with them. So if I see someone on Tuesday, Thursday, when I'm with them on Tuesday for the first visit, I'll schedule them for Thursday while I'm leaving the visit on Tuesday. And then when scheduling, I don't say, hey, when's the best time for you? I say, hey, are you available this time or this time? I try to give them less options. I try to be firm, professional, because sometimes if you give a patient some wiggle room, they might just walk all over you, and then it'll be tough to just be efficient with your time. And next point, I always try to schedule my nearby patients together. So, for example, one job, I worked in the Bay Area, in the East Bay, and the territory was fairly large, but I pretty much would see some patients only on the north side one day, and then I would see patients on the south side on one day. And I would try to live in a central location. So I would be very efficient to not like drive in the opposite direction if I didn't have to, and to try to see all the patients in the same area. And I also would use Google Maps just to map the routes when choosing which patients to go to. And another fun thing is also using the bathroom. It's an interesting thought. A lot of therapists don't ever go in patient homes, or some don't even use like gas stations, restaurants. Some just go at home. But I have no shame going to the bathroom in a patient's home. I just choose the ones that are clean and spotless. And I've never had a bad experience because I see some homes that I wouldn't go to the bathroom in, and I can just hold it. But that's what I'll do to save time because it takes time to go to a gas station, go to a restaurant. Once in a while I'll do that, but I have no shame going in a patient's bathroom, and is what it is. And also it's I document fairly quickly as well. I always try to get depending on what's the job, they should give you a tablet. And when they give you a tablet, they some give you a keyboard, or sometimes you have to buy a separate keyboard. And I love keyboards because it gives you the opportunity to type as you're looking at the patient. So it's like you're making contact, you're looking at them as well. And I finish most of my notes while I'm with the patient, except for a start of care and a little bit of the eval. And I use templates as much as I can. Even for home care home base, I have a list of templates. If you guys ever need templates, just feel free to reach out. But these are ways to be more efficient in home health. And so we're pretty much done. So, but it's essentially, I don't want you guys to settle as therapists because the more that we settle, the more employers increase the productivity standard. And if a job's unfair, either ask your employer and let them know this is unfair, or maybe just change jobs. Because I feel like if employers had good productivity standards, retention levels would increase. Because when an employer loses an employee, they lose a lot of money finding a new therapist. So it makes sense just to have like a fair, good paying job with good productivity standards. So they have a higher retention rate and they don't lose money finding a new therapist. And another phrase is just the more you accept unfair productivity, the more your employer will increase the unfair productivity standard. And just remember that. And thank you all for showing up. And you can just, I'll probably, I might post it again, but you can just find this or find me in the Rate My Therapy Company Facebook group. And you can also find me on Instagram. And if you guys ever do want to start the travel journey to explore different settings, feel free to reach out to me because I also provide travel therapy referrals as well. And that is all I got. Finish in about 34 minutes. Stop share.